So if you're someone who likes to watch cooking content, you've definitely heard of Joshua Weissman. To me, he is the final cooking boss. To me, he is also a masturbator. And by that, I mean he baits you in with the promises of a nicely cooked meal before hitting you with something like this.
So go ahead and crack out the old sous vide circulator, then run that through a pasta roller, fire up a pizza oven, gently submerge your bird into the brine, place a loose fitting lid on it, then ferment at 78 degrees Fahrenheit.
I can't do this, Joshua. I can't. I don't have an 1800s French guillotine to chop my meat with because the rust on the metal interacts with the muscle fibers of the meat and creates a unique texture which the recipe is nothing without. I honestly like to watch his recipes when I want to challenge myself. I've also never challenged myself. Up until now. Now, the recipe that I decided to go with is bread. Yep, you heard it right. Just bread. Just bread, nothing insane, just supermarket toast. Now, there's many different reasons why I chose this recipe. The first one is that I use bread in my day-to-day life, and I don't really want to waste food. It's also a recipe that's relatively cheap. I don't have to buy any exotic ingredients. I've also never baked in my life. I heard there were monsters hiding in the oven. And to be fair, I'm also kind of lazy. So onto the ingredients. For this recipe, you're going to need 174 grams of water, 125 grams of whole milk, which I didn't have. I have the lactose intolerant milk, and I don't even know what whole milk means. 9 grams of yeast, 440 grams of bread flour, 8 grams of sea salt, 21 grams of sugar, granulated sugar, that is, and 42 grams of unsalted butter. Step number 1. Bloom the yeast, whatever that means. Add your water into a saucepan or just any pan of your liking because we're going to heat it. I realized I had added too little, so I wanted to balance it out. And then I realized I added too much, so I wanted to balance it out. And then I realized I took out too much, so I wanted to balance it out. And then I just decided, you know what, it probably doesn't matter that much. Once you have the right amount of water, you want to add in the 125 grams of milk. As I said, the recipe called for whole milk, but I just had this lactose intolerant milk. I'm not sure if it would have played a huge role. And then you want to heat the milky water mixture to 37 degrees Celsius. You clearly can't see it on my food thermometer right now, but just imagine really hard, it's saying 37 degrees. The spoon is there for emotional support as the water and milk were kind of worried about this whole process. Once that is well heated, you want to add some yeast. Pro tip, if you want to add the yeast, don't cut the packet open right on top of the saucepan. You want to add just the yeast. You don't want to add the plastic wrapper. You don't need it. Once you've done everything, it should kind of maybe look like this. You also want to wrap it up quite tightly with a plastic wrapper and then set it aside for about 10 minutes. Step number 2. Dry ingredients. I realized that the flour that I bought was actually a mixture of bread flour and other ingredients that I don't really need. So in traditional fashion, I already started changing up the recipe and I decided to use white flour instead. In a big bowl, you want to add in 440 grams of flour. I also added in the 8 grams of sea salt, and I also added in 21 grams of granulated sugar. Give that all a nice whisk, or as Joshua would say, some whiskey business, I believe. After about 10 minutes, your milky mixture should have been bloomed. Mine does look very bloomy. I don't think it gets bloomier than this. And step number 3 is pretty much just mixing your bloomed yeast with the dry ingredients. Now in the video, he uses a stand mixer. I don't really have a stand mixer, but I did find this hand mixer that I bought. Wait, that rhymes. Stand mixer, hand mixer. I did find this hand mixer that I bought maybe like 3 months ago, and it did have the right attachments, so I was hoping it would do the job. Once it's formed somewhat of a cohesive dough, I scraped down the sides and then started giving it a little fold with a spatula. I also noticed my dough was incredibly sticky, and I couldn't really figure out why. I thought it's something that would go away on its own, like after a while or after some more mixing. Spoilers, it didn't. I decided to go back in with the hand mixer and then add in the 42 grams of butter. And at about this point, the thoughts of I have no clue what I'm doing started to settle in. Because for some reason, the butter was just not incorporating in with the dough. I don't know if it was the hand mixer. It might have been my technique. It might have been the fact that the butter was not softened long enough, but I did leave it out at room temperature for about 30 to 40 minutes. Still, it wasn't really like willing to mix in that well. It kind of like just chilled to the side on its own, minding its own business. So I eventually gave up and decided to dump all of the butter in there. I realize I'm already over this. I'm not here to do any of this like one by one shit. And much to my surprise, the other knobs of butter were also not mixing in that well with the dough. They just looked like they were escaping it every time. No matter how close I got to them, they were just running away from me. Once your butter is well incorporated, wink wink, you want to maybe give it another fold with a spatula, scrape off all the sides, and that is exactly what I did. It was a tough workout. Like, I'm somebody who goes to the gym, and even then, I could feel my forearms getting blasted by it. And unfortunately, since I'm somebody who's never baked, I didn't really know if that's how dough was supposed to feel like or not. Now in his video, Joshua turned it into a round ball before letting it rest. I tried to do the same, but mine was just incredibly sticky. It just felt like I was playing with a Pillsbury Doughboy shit. It was just getting stuck to my hands. It wasn't like doughing like it was supposed to. And I just figured to myself, you know what? Next step. Now step 4 is you want to let Jonathan rest. Yes, that's his name. His name is Jonathan. And you want to let him rest for about 1 hour to 1 hour 30 minutes. I also realized this was not a good idea, so I decided to take out a small bowl to put it in instead, because I just could not close the plastic wrapper around this. And make sure your bowl is also greased up. I didn't want to touch it again with my hands, so I just decided to let it fall and... Kobe. Cover Jonathan with some plastic wrap, maybe give him a good night kiss, maybe touch him a bit. Okay, bro, stop. What are you doing? After about 1 hour 30 minutes, your dough should have doubled in size, and mine did. Now in the video, Joshua used a rolling pin to pretty much stretch out the dough, but I didn't really have one, so I just used my water canister, which is clearly not doing a great job. It's not because it's the water canister, it's just because the dough is incredibly sticky for some reason. No matter how hard I tried, it didn't work, and I also was fearful that my table would literally break apart. I decided I was over it once again and just rolled Jonathan into a tube to put him in his 9 by whatever container. Transfer the dough into the container, and you pretty much want to let it rest again for about 45 minutes. However, you don't want to cover him with plastic wrap. You pretty much just want to cover it with a damp towel. Okay, bro, why do you keep doing this? Stop. After about 45 minutes, wake Jonathan up. It's showtime. Preheat your oven to around 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 Celsius. Put in Jonathan inside the oven and then give everybody what they want. A time lapse. Okay, buddy, relax. Don't get too comfortable. After about 35 minutes of baking, you want to drop Jonathan on his head.
Damn, that's bread. Woo!
I decided to go in for a taste, and to my surprise...
This is amazing.
This tastes so good, and it's just bread. It's not supposed to taste this good.
Oh my god.
It's just bread. I'm eating bread. Why does this bread taste so good? It's bread. Yeah, I mean, it's just bread. I thought it tasted pretty good. I liked it a lot. It was very enjoyable. I never really thought I would just sit there in my kitchen eating raw bread, but here I am. So to answer this video's question, can a beginner make Joshua Weissman's easiest recipe? The answer is probably yes, but only if you manage your expectations as a beginner. I'm not somebody who has never cooked in his life. I do have some cooking experience, albeit very basic, and I always try to manage my expectations before I make a recipe, especially if I got it from a YouTube video, because I know for a fact it's not going to turn out exactly the same. The bread tasted good after a few days even, and the only issues that I ran with it is 1, it ended up having way too much of a cakey texture, and 2, it kind of fell apart every time I wanted to eat from it. Not fully, but I could clearly notice it was barely hanging together by a thin thread. So at the end of the day, it did solve the issue of the dough being too sticky. I tried to look into what could have caused both of these issues, and there's way too many factors at play, but I would have to assume that it is a combination of not kneading the dough enough, using the wrong type of flour, even though online it said you could actually replace it with white flour anyway, and perhaps my technique of mixing the dough with the wet ingredients and the butter. Also, my girlfriend loved this bread. She was literally snacking off of it. Then again, I don't really have that much snacks on my place, so that could have played a role too. So after making this bread and tasting it, I would probably rate it about a 7 out of 10. If someone who was better than me at baking had made it, it would probably be an 8 or a 9, because I might have ran into some issues while making it. But overall, 7 out of 10. If you've never baked before in your life and you want to start somewhere, start here.